Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are about to begin the free agency period for the 2035-2036 season. We have lost a decent amount of talent off of our 108 win team from a year ago. We've lost most notably our closer, Chris Staten, who only was with us for 2.5 months. We picked him up before the trade deadline, but one of the top closers in the game, but not someone we could afford to bring back. We also lost Andrew Painter, longtime member of our starting rotation, who in recent years had served as a stopper for us, and then most recently as an arm out of the bullpen who could also start some games for us when we needed him to. Offensively, lost Marcelo Meyer, who was our starting second baseman last year against right-handed pitching, and we also lost the veteran outfield bat Jace Barofin. So significant losses, but not crippling, I don't believe, particularly given some of the young hitting talent we have coming up in our system. Most notably Joe Gallagher, the number 4 prospect in baseball, who hit 74 homers across 4 levels last year, and Arturo Flores, who has been with us in the playoffs each of the last couple seasons and probably will stick with the full-time roster, the Major League roster full-time this coming season, unless we're able to add a pretty quality utility infielder in free agency or the Rule 5 draft or through the trade market. And I wouldn't say it's a huge hole that we need to fill, because Flores certainly has a pretty productive bat. He's durable, good personality with that captain personality. The issue is he's a first baseman / DH, and that's all he's ever going to be at the major league level, but really has nothing left to prove at the AAA level at this point. So if he ends up being an infielder / pinch hitter / DH for us this year, not the end of the world. On the pitching side, certainly have holes to fill with the loss of Painter and Staten, but we've got some talent in AAA, some talent that's a little further away. Most notably, we've only got about $6 million to spend, and we don't have a lot of money for extensions, and our scouting and player development budgets are still a bit lower than they were a year ago, so in theory, we'd like to use some of this money in those budgets before all is said and done. We were able to pare back our draft budget a bit since we don't expect to have a compensatory pick this year like we did a year ago. So I don't think we can make a ton of moves this offseason, and there are some modest holes to fill. As I said, utility infielder would be nice to upgrade there. With the fact that we made that trade for Rangel and then brought back James Wood at a lower price, feel like the left-handed hitting 4th or 5th outfielder we were looking for, that role is filled. So offensively, it's really just maybe a utility infielder, and it's not a glaring need. And then as far as the pitching staff, we could use 1 or 2 arms. But with Mike Waters coming out of AAA and Jaden Hilaire, who we picked in the Rule 5 a few years ago, who's also in AAA for us, we don't have to go crazy trying to get somebody. Hopefully we'll bring in some guys who can compete for roster spots in the Rule 5. Maybe there will be some bargains a couple months from now in free agency. But I quite honestly think it's going to be a very quiet offseason for our Buffalo Wings this year as we prepare for a 2036 season. And then the big event at the end of that season is going to be whether or not Shamar Jenneret opts into his contract or opts out of his contract. The 30-year-old has been with us 2 years out of that 7-year contract we signed him to. Admittedly, with the opt-out after 3 years he required. All he's done in those 2 years is lead the league in ribbies both times. He just won the second MVP award of his career with us this season. And in 2034, all he did was win the World Series MVP. as our 112-win Buffalo Wings won the World Series. So Jenneret has been incredibly productive for us, has really given us the bat in the middle of our lineup that we had been lacking in previous tries in the playoffs in the earlier years of this simulation. But if he opts in, probably means the end of Deshaun Seifu's career with the Buffalo Wings. If he opts out, we probably have an option to try to bring Seifu back in 2037. That also potentially allows us to get more active with the likes of Jorge Carrillo and Juan Veliz, two pretty important arms in our bullpen who will also be free agents after this upcoming season. So have a lot to think about and a lot to plan for. But as I said, I don't think it's going to be a wildly active offseason for the Buffalo Wings here this year. And we've simmed ahead through the first few weeks of free agency, haven't been involved in anything, but we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. A few interesting names, at least one of which is familiar. Left fielder Tommy Dykstra is available. That's not the familiar name, but this is a switch-hitting outfielder. Doesn't bring much to the table at all defensively, but excellent home run power, pretty good eye. He's durable, has decent speed, can bunt a little bit. Could certainly be in the mix for a fifth outfielder spot with us. If his outfield ability was a little better, I'd feel a little better about potentially bringing him into the organization. Right fielder Jeff Beck is allegedly a 3-star prospect according to our scout. He is less interesting to me with a pretty mediocre bat. Catcher Julio Contilla, 21-year-old out of Venezuela. Don't love the personality, not great defensively, and his bat still has a lot of work to be ready for the majors. Right fielder Randy Mahan has a little pop in his bat, is a left-handed hitter, but is not all that exciting a prospect to me. The last of the 3-star prospects is a familiar name, though, Juan Villapando, member of the Cincinnati Reds organization. We traded him away 12/16/2035. Oh, that wasn't a trade with us. I was like, okay, yeah, we traded him as part of the Alexis Barajas trade. I saw where he was just traded a week ago, and I was like, I didn't trade him. Is there something really weird going on here? But there's not. So Juan Villapando, decent second baseman prospect who came up through our organization. As I mentioned, he was one of the players with some potential who was involved in that Barajas trade. Don't love his poor arm and his middling range as an infielder. He does, for a utility infielder, have a potentially decent bat, a little bit of speed, pretty good bunter. So Vilpando and Dykstra intrigue me a bit among the batters. Among the pitchers, there are a big list of people that we think have either 3-star ability and or 3-star potential. So I'm not going to go through them all here, but we'll let you know who is interesting to me, if anyone. And honestly, there's only one pitcher who's mildly interesting to me. My assumption is he'll be there in the later rounds. So we'll see what our scouting director recommends. And he recommends Ryan Ramsey. He is not the reliever that I was interested in. Not a horrible pitching profile, but he's almost 35 years old, coming off of a partially torn UCL. Just don't see him being a guy that we want to potentially commit $1.3 million to. So Ramsey will not be joining us. And I am going to go for Tommy Dykstra. He's got some huge holes in his game. Doesn't really have a position that he can play competently. he's going to strike out an insane amount of time. But he's only 25 years old. He's durable, potentially can draw some walks. He's going to hit some home runs. I'm looking at this. He combined for 65 home runs last year across 3 levels. It's kind of crazy that his current team, I guess that would be the Texas Rangers, did not protect him, but they, recognize the same holes that we do. And, I think about Arturo Flores on our team, who is probably a more well-balanced hitting prospect, although not quite the same home run power. But he's another guy who has issues defensively, better personality than Dykstra. So I don't think there's any guarantee that Dykstra makes our team, and we may just send him back. But I think he's at least a guy worth bringing into camp. So we are going to go ahead and draft Mr. Dykstra, move on to the second round. And our scouting director is still recommending Ryan Ramsey. We are still going to pass on Mr. Ryan Ramsey. If the infielder Vilpando was still around, we would have taken him now. But it looks like he was taken 19th pick by the Angels. But the reliever that we were interested in looks like he is still available. And so we are going to go ahead and bring a veteran into camp. Andy Rodriguez, 37 years old. You can say, hey, you just didn't take a 34-year-old reliever that your scout is recommending while you're taking a 37-year-older. And I'd say, stop asking me questions. Relax. I'm not as dumb as I look. Rodriguez, although he's older, is not coming off of an injury. He also doesn't throw incredibly hard. But Rodriguez is only on a minor league contract right now. So if we did keep him, we'd be paying him the league minimum as opposed to the $1.3 million that we would have to be paying to Mr. Ramsey. And although Ramsey's got better stuff, his movement and control are not up to the same level as Mr. Rodriguez, who could be potentially a useful 7th or 8th arm as a right-hander out of our bullpen. Don't think he'll make the team, but certainly willing to bring Mr. Rodriguez into camp to see what he looks like. Scouting director in the 3rd round has moved away from Ryan Ramsey, and he's moved back to Sean Sullivan. Or he hasn't moved back to Sean Sullivan, but he's moved to Sean Sullivan, longtime Buffalo Wing, who we moved on from this past season, had a 5.21 ERA and 107 innings pitched for the White Sox. He's on a minor league contract at this point. I don't think Sullivan likely makes the team either, but, and some of you will make fun of me for this, I do have a soft spot for my former players. So we are going to, and Sullivan is also on a minor league contract right now. So if we bring him back, we're just going to be paying him the major league minimum if he somehow makes the 26-man roster. So we'll go ahead and listen to our scout here and welcome Sean Sullivan back to the Buffalo Wings organization. And with those 3 picks, that's all we're going to do here in this draft. So we're going to continue moving on with the offseason as we get close to New Year's Day 2036. And in recent days, both of the pitchers I mentioned, Andrew Painter and Chris Staten, have moved on. Painter signed a 2-year deal for almost $10 million a year with the Mets. Staten, the reliever for him, the market for him as a reliever, actually a closer, was not as strong. Looks like he got about $9.5 million for 1 year with the Cubs. Interestingly, he still would consider a trade back to us, so that's kind of good to have in our back pocket. Obviously, it could change between now and the trade deadline next July, but he is also a guy who maybe could help us make a another playoff appearance if we were to bring him back at some point in the season during next season through a trade. And the calendar is turned to 2036. Don't do this every year, but I know some of you are interested in finding out who makes the Hall of Fame. You can see some guys who seem like they are well on their way to Hall of Fame careers, like Aaron Judge and possibly Garrett Cole, still not in. But Craig Kimbrell, Freddie Freeman, and Nolan Arenado all elected to the Hall of Fame here in 2036. That's a pretty big class for OOTP. From my experience, I find it oftentimes there's 0 or 1 people selected, so a 3-person class is not a bad-sized class. Arenado, over the course of his career, 272 average, 475 homers, 1,576 ribbies, put up some pretty solid numbers for several mythical seasons as he makes the Hall of Fame. Freddie Freeman had some big years with the Dodgers in the fictional universe here. Ended up with a 301 career batting average, almost 3,300 hits, and 440 homers, 1,663 ribbies. So clearly looks like a Hall of Famer as well. And then Craig Kimbrell, that one's a little bit more of a surprise to me. 395 saves, 54 and 45 record. Did end up with a 2.66 ERA and a outstanding 13.2 strikeouts per 9 innings. And he's got the 3 Mariano Rivera awards that he technically won in real life. I don't know. This one's a bit of a surprise to me. I think Craig Kimbrell has had a nice career thus far. I don't know that I've ever viewed him as a Hall of Famer, but maybe that's just me. And we've simmed ahead another couple weeks to the start of the international free agent signing period. So this will be something where we can actually perhaps get active. So although this isn't going to be a long episode, I think I'll review the international amateur free agents and then likely conclude this episode. It's always helpful to hear the opinions of those of you who take the time to watch these videos and take the time to choose to share your thoughts with me. So always interesting to hear perspectives on what decisions we should make, and the international amateur free agents are no different. There's 4 pitchers that we've been scouting more heavily. Alejandro de Santiago is a 16-year-old out of the Dominican. Like the high leadership and work ethic, likes that he's already throwing in the mid-90s, like that his fastball, his sinker, and his splitter are already not that far off major league quality. His control is going to be the big question, and at least according to our scout, doesn't look like he will ever be a frontline starter. But certainly if he reached his full potential, could be a pretty useful 4th or 5th starter. Rodolfo Carrasquillo, a 16-year-old out of Venezuela, throws in the low to mid-90s. A little bit more mixed personality there, like the high loyalty, don't love the low leadership. Certainly has the stamina to start, has a potential up to 5-pitch arsenal, including a potentially devastating knuckle curve if everything works out. And looks like he could be above average in terms of his stuff, his movement, and his control. David Bautista, another 16-year-old out of the Dominican. Like the durability, doesn't throw quite as hard yet as the other prospects, but a guy who could have a 3 to 4 pitch arsenal, including an excellent slider. And his stuff and his movement could both be above average. and his control could be well above average. He's also a lefty and durable. And then the big gun, at least according to our scout, is Jorge Rente, another 16-year-old out of Venezuela. Has the stamina to be a pretty useful starter, excellent at holding runners, a potential 4-pitch arsenal. 3 of those pitches aren't far off major league quality. And if he fully develops, his stuff is exceptional, movement is excellent, and his control is above average. So he is a high ceiling prospect. The Milkman, also another lefty. So I think the 4 pitching prospects are all pretty interesting. A little bit of a bummer that none of them are looking to sign for bargain basement price. Ms. 1.3 to 1.4 million for Santiago, Carrasquillo, and Batista. And Rente, perhaps not surprisingly, looking for 2.6 million. But also is as I said, a pretty high ceiling pitching prospect if everything works out for the 6'2", 16-year-old. So as I mentioned, I like the 4 pitching prospects who are out there, or that we've scouted more actively. There's also 6 everyday player prospects that we've been scouting more actively recently as well. We actually also signed Gennaro Rebagliati somewhat aggressively in the early stages, the first 2 periods. Didn't think his upside was high enough to offset his low work ethic and his low intelligence, so we did end up moving on after 2 camps from Rebagliati to the shortstop Juan Blanco. And Blanco's not an exceptional prospect, but we do like his personality with the high leadership and work ethic, decent infield range and decent arm. And if he fully develops, looks like he could be a decent bat. I don't think he's a shortstop. Could be an interesting third baseman if the bat fully develops. So we like Blanco, and he's also not looking for a ton of money and also doesn't have very high league interest. So he's somewhat intriguing to me. David Fabrero is a second baseman. In a best case scenario, he's a similar offensive player, but I don't think he gets quite to the level. Also doesn't bring much to the table defensively. Like that he's a good bunter, but has some personality issues. Probably not the direction we would go. I think that we would certainly go with Blanco over Fabrero. Daniel Vera, a 16-year-old center fielder out of the Dominican. Decent outfield range. Don't know if he truly is a center fielder, but a potentially interesting bat if he completely develops with 70 contact, 70 avoid strikeouts, and still above average in gap power, home run power, and eye. So he is certainly the most intriguing bat that we've looked at so far. Another guy who's also not looking for an insane amount of money at this point. And then there's the 3 real high-end prospects, according to our scout. Center fielder Nelson Morel, a 16-year-old out of Venezuela. Looks like he could have a pretty decent bat if it fully develops. Decent speed, pretty good bunter, and an acceptable corner outfielder who could play center field in a pinch. So not a horrible prospect in Morel. Looking for a decent amount of money. Probably not the direction that I would be inclined to go, but also not the worst prospect in the world. Luis Molina, older for an international amateur free agent at 18 years old. Do like the high work ethic. He is a mediocre corner outfielder, but he's got the potential to have a really special bat, 80 contact, 70 home run power, above average eye if he fully develops. Doesn't really have the speed to take full advantage of that gap power that he has, and as I mentioned, he is older than your typical international amateur free agent prospect, but still certainly intriguing. And then the catcher, Ramiro Castillo, only average defensively, but could have excellent home run power, an excellent eye, and above average contact. Do like that he's got high work ethic. So I'd say I'd probably like Castillo, Molina, Vera, and Blanco are probably the four that I like the most, given the potential value in these players. I think right now I am probably inclined to make a run at the big pitcher, Jorge Rente, the milkman. Go for the guy with just a ridiculous ceiling if he completely develops. Roll the dice and try to get a big time starting pitcher to build around. And I imagine Rente will end up going for, if we bid for him and are able to get him, the full 4.75 million that we have to spend. And it's not inconceivable to me that he would go for an amount more than what we have available, which would likely eliminate us from being able to compete for him unless we're able to make a trade to get some IAFA money from some other teams, which hasn't proven too easy for me to execute on in the past. But my initial inclination might be to make a offer to Rente right away, and then a supplemental offer to one of the lower priced players, offensive players, either the center fielder Daniel Vera or the shortstop Juan Blanco, perhaps, with the thought that it's pretty unlikely that we would end up getting anybody in addition to Rente if we went that way with him. The other alternative is to go with one of the big-time offensive players that we really like. Castillo, certainly with that potential 70 home run power and 70 eye, is very unique for a catcher. I don't love that he's only average defensively, but he's still an interesting prospect. And then Molina, although he's older, that bat is potentially excellent. So if I wanted to go big with a everyday player who's likely to end up making 4.75 million or perhaps more, I think I would lean towards Castillo or Molina. But if you've got ideas on what we should do, would love to hear them in the comments. As I said, right now, and those of you who have watched me over the years know that I am a sucker for a pitching prospect, but Jorge Rente, a very high-end pitching prospect, if everything develops perfectly, which admittedly it rarely does, but he's going to be very tempting to me, and I think that's probably the route I am leaning towards going here in international amateur free agency here in 2036. And before we finish up the episode, we'll just take a real quick look at free agency. And the real big pitchers, including Painter and our former closer, are off the market, as we've talked about. Paul Skeens, big name, who's still out there. That 40 movement doesn't excite me. The lack of positive personality traits doesn't excite me. But he's coming off of a pretty good season with a 4.4 WAR, but he's 33 years old, fragile, looking for 18 million. Realistically, not someone we can even compete for. Taking a look at the top batters who are available: Juan Soto, still out there. Jace Barofin. Could always make a run at having Barofin join our team again, but 7 million is above what we can afford right now. Certainly we could make a move to take a little bit out of scouting and player development to try to sign him if we wanted to, but certainly not going to look towards pushing anything with him right now. Marcelo Meyer still looking for 14.5 million. Jordan Westberg, a former player on our team, looking for 6. CJ Abrams, who seems to always be a free agent, looking for 2.2, but at 35 years old, below average bat, wrecked physically. He can play multiple positions defensively, but not particularly great at any of them. Does still have decent speed and pretty good on the base paths. Camden Kozil wouldn't be a bad utility infielder with that bat and a good personality, but we can't afford to be paying $15.5 million for him. So don't know that there's any obvious moves out there. Alfredo Lavador, another guy who could be an interesting utility infielder, but the defense just isn't quite where I'd want it to be. And at $6.5 million, still pretty expensive. Some other guys who could potentially maybe fill that role. Alex Mooney, the shortstop, better defensively than some of the others, has some speed, but the bat not quite as good. Fragile, looking for $11 million. And then Adrian Santana has everything you'd want in terms of defense and speed for a utility infielder. The bat is not a major league bat. He's wrecked physically, and he's looking for around $8.5 million. So I don't think there's any obvious solutions for us among the players who are out there right now. Quite honestly, Westberg, who can play multiple positions and still has a decent-ish major league bat, at least when you look at the ratings. But you look at the last 3 seasons, including 2033 for us in Buffalo, and he's been a below-average offensive player every year. And the last 2 years, he's been below replacement level overall, going to be 37 before the season starts. So I don't think there's anyone we need to chase among either the pitchers or the hitters. If there's a bargain out there, we'll certainly think about it in a month or two. We'll keep trolling the trade market and see if maybe there's a way that we can add some help. Some of you have noted, and I completely agree, that when I think about our 40-man roster, particularly if Jenneret decides to opt in next year, that Arturo Flores and, if I could actually find him, Joe Gallagher, have some pretty similar traits to Jenneret, in that they don't really have a position you like playing them at defensively. They're all right-handed hitters. And particularly if Jenneret opts in, probably going to need to trade away Flores or Gallagher a year from now. So there's certainly an argument, if there's a deal to be made for one of those guys, trade them away now. And even if Jenneret does opt out, still have one of them left to kind of fill that DH role going forward. So we've got some ammunition with a farm system that is ranked 6th overall right now, with 5 top 100 prospects to make a trade if we need to. And we'll continue perusing the trade market in our next episode. And we'll also make some decisions on what to do in international amateur free agency then. So if you've got thoughts, share them, and we'll see if, one, whether or not you agree with my initial plan, and 2, possibly, whether you can influence my behavior. And we'll find out where we decide to end up going in terms of international amateur free agents and the rest of the offseason in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.